everyone is holding their collective breath while they're waiting for the appraisal to come in on a real estate transaction. The buyer, the lender, the seller, and the licensees representing the buyer and seller. What is an appraisal? And let's discuss what everyone gets so nervous about. Hi, I'm Keith Weinhold, Get Rich Education founder, Forbes Real Estate Council member, and longtime real estate investor. An appraisal is an independent third-party estimate of a property's value, and you do get an exact appraised value down to the dollar. The reason for an appraisal is that it verifies the value of your lender's collateral, which is the property that you're buying. Because if you default on your payments down the road, your bank or lender must take back the property. They must ensure then that their collateral has value. So that's an appraisal's purpose. It's about satisfying the lender. Okay, so say that you're a buyer making a $500K purchase offer and the seller accepts your offer. Great, your offer is contingent upon you securing financing and an adequate appraisal. A lender will not lend you more money than the appraisal determines that the property is worth. In fact, most lenders will require you to have some skin in the game as well, kind of their buffer, and they're only going to finance a loan based on an agreed upon loan to value ratio. Say that's 80%. All right, well, 80% of your $500K property, that means that they'll loan you up to $400K then, and the rest is your 20% down payment, in this case, $100K. All right, your down payment, that also helps protect the lender's investment should you default, because you wouldn't want to walk away from that. The more you put down, the less investment risk is assumed by the lender, and the more by you. Yes, most people seem to think it's the opposite. All right, well, here's what everyone in this transaction is holding their breath on. The risk that a property doesn't appraise for the $500K that you and the seller agreed upon. Say it only comes back at $475K. Oh gosh. This is everybody's least favorite outcome, because now the seller is at risk of receiving less for their property than they believe it is worth, and you might have to find some extra money. And though this low appraisal usually doesn't happen, I mean, this could blow up the whole transaction. So now what? Because see, the bank, they'll still only loan 80% of the property's value, meaning they'll now only loan $380K. What's going to happen next? It depends on what you and the seller can work out. Will the seller just lower the sale price to $475K for you? Well, if so, well, that's great. Your problem is solved, but some sellers, see, they won't take a $25K hit to their profit like that. What if the seller won't lower the $500K agreed upon price at all? All right, well, the bank is still only going to loan you 80% of the appraised value, $380K. So instead of you coming out of pocket just $100K, like you had thought before you got the appraisal, it's going to be an extra $20K, then a $120K down payment total. You can see why that's a problem. You may or may not be able to swing that, and even if you can, you might not want to. Then that would blow up the entire deal. Well, in this unlikely, but certainly possible case of this low appraisal, a more common scenario is for you and the seller to meet in the middle somewhere. Say they'd lower the purchase price down to $490K, and then you'd only have to come out of pocket an extra $10K. Who orders the appraisal? That is the buyer's lender, and in most states, the buyer pays for it. An appraisal, it's sort of like a snapshot value, and it's performed by a licensed or certified appraiser who uses specific criteria to determine the value of the property on a specific date. An appraiser will arrive at that value using one of three approaches. These are, number one, the cost approach. That's the estimate of the cost of producing or replacing physical property. Secondly, the sales comparison approach, which is the valuation of the worth of the property. And then thirdly is the income approach. That's the forecasting of the monetary earning power of the property, especially in the case of something like an apartment building. Now, the first one, the cost approach, determining what a property would cost to replicate, that's often used confused with properties where that property is unique, like a historic church being converted into a residence, or where there are few comparables available. Something like that might be the case for rural properties or properties with unusual characteristics. When determining value for a residential property, the second one, the sales comparison approach, that is usually given the most weight. The income approach is used for a lot of income generating properties. Properties with more than 4 units, they're considered commercial properties, and they've got to be appraised by a certified general appraiser. Now that you understand the 3 appraisal approaches, how about some good news? Most appraisals seem to come in right exactly on value for what you and the seller agreed to. And finally, another less common scenario is when the appraisal comes in high, say then $525K for the property that you and the seller agreed to a $500K purchase price for. Hey, well, that's great for you. The lender will loan you more than enough to buy the property, and you are now $25K richer because you have $25K of instant equity. But a too high appraisal has its own issues for the seller, because if the seller learns that their property appraised at much higher than the asking price, then there's not much that they can do except blame their listing agent. That's an appraisal explained, and why it matters. Stay here. I've got another simple explanation in our explained video series next. You can watch this one next.